Does it make sense for you to focus on the bins as one of your primary sourcing strategies for used clothing to resell on eBay, Poshmark, wherever? The answer is yes. If you don't know the bins term, that is shorthand for the Goodwill outlets, which is where they offload some of the stuff that they can't or won't sell in the retail thrifts, either by the weight or by item, priced way lower than if you found the same stuff hung up on a rack at a normal Goodwill. I was a clothing flipper for at least probably 2 or 3 years before I started focusing on the bins as an actual part of my strategy. I went a couple times when I was living up in LA, and as with every thrift store, the bins in LA, or the proper LA one, I know that there's multiples, was a true madhouse. I think I've lost the photos now, unfortunately. I wish I could flash it up on the screen, but I took these pics of when they wheeled a new bin out, and people were standing with their shoulders touching, a line of probably at least 50 people per side, and attacking the clothing. They had this rule where you had to wait for the bin to come to a complete stop before you started browsing it, and people would just attack it. So the competition can be intense and extreme. People get into pissing contests and little turf wars. That's true of all thrift stores, but especially the bins. People get vicious. The competition can be a little more intense, and it's dirtier. When I went in, first couple times, I touched a couple wet things in the bins, and I didn't want to deal with the hassle. And so I kind of wrote it off, which was too bad because I probably lost out on a lot of money. And I think that experience is typical of a lot of newer resellers. When they first go to the bins, you get grossed out. That is one of the negatives. They don't sort through the stuff as much or really at all. And there is a little bit of an extra spice of danger, literal and figurative, when you source at the bins. Sometimes there's broken glass in the hard goods bins. And it's not just Goodwill. There are other thrift chains that do this. But I have cut my hand on glass at bins before. I've seen all kinds of stains. I've seen every variety of human stain. I've experienced all of the essential humors, medieval style. All of the ichors. A lot of people sort through it with gloves. I don't do that because I'm not a little baby. So there are those downsides. It's not like retail thrift stores are super hygienic environments, but there's less of the gross. And it is crowded, but so are all thrift stores. That's one of the reasons why it is very important to know your stuff when it comes to clothing, because I can go through the bins to brag egregiously after 20 people have gone through, and I can still find stuff that they didn't recognize had value monetarily in terms of resale, because I've done this for so long and because I'm such a big smart boy. If you look in the description to the video, that may have just gotten reformatted so it might look weird, but if you click the more thing, there is a link to something called the Menswear Manifesto. It's my guide to 330 men's clothing brands to resell. It's free. It's pay what you want. Look at it. Figure out what you think it's worth. Pay me that. So that's a good place to get started if you don't have the street knowledge. The gross thing is less important to me than one of the big negatives, the real negatives, which is that the condition of the clothing is going to be much less than at retail thrift stores, which already you have to screen pretty hard. But at the bins, the quality is going to be lower, typically, in a number of senses. Roughly, the brands will be slightly lower quality. You're not going to find as much of the really good stuff, with a couple of important exceptions that I'll talk about. And the quality of the clothing itself, as in the condition, stains, tears, rips, holes, pilling, is going to be poorer. That's why a lot of that stuff ends up at the bins, because Goodwill does have people that are looking at the clothing before they put it out. They give it a cursory once over. And if flaws pop out, if there's a big conspicuous hole or some stains, they'll throw it in the bins before it doesn't sell there, and then they wad it up into gigantic bales that they ship off to Africa. Another negative is that it takes slightly longer to look at the same number of clothing items because you have to pick it up and look at the tag, kind of unfold it and find the tag, the brand tag, because they're not hung up on hangers. So you have to like hunt and peck and dig, and it takes a little bit longer. And that was always my rationale when I first started going to the bins, was that I'm a much smarter reseller going to the retail Goodwills because I can flip this quickly and look at all the labels and just cover more ground and cherry pick the good stuff, which is a good skill to have. But I thought that more than compensated for the greatly reduced cost of goods that you get at the bins, and it doesn't. It's worth the hunt. It does take longer. It's physically a different process, so it could be a little hard on your body. It's actually, I think, a little gentler on me with my messed up neck and back, actually to source at the bins than it is to source at retail thrifts. Your situation may be different. That about covers all of the negatives that I can think of. There really aren't that many. The big upsides are obviously the price. So Goodwill bins, or just bins period, all have different pricing structures based on your region. Yours may be more or less expensive. You may have a pay by the item bins, you may have a pay by the pound bins, but even worst case scenario, even if you are at one of like the pricier bins, it's still going to be cheaper than spending $7-8 on a shirt. Sometimes that is very worth it. A lot of times that's very worth it. And I've talked about that extensively, exhaustively on this channel. But for the most part, your cost of goods is going to be greatly diminished. And there are other places where you can get clothing for cheaper than the bins. But it is much harder to find those deals consistently as the bins. So I would say the worst that you can say about the bins are that they are a nice middle ground between a retail thrift, full price retail thrift, and the really, really cheap deals that you can find if you look hard enough. For example, sometimes like if you have something like $1 day or a $2 day at a local retail thrift or thrift chain where you are, and you find something like a heavy winter jacket for $2, that might actually be cheaper, probably will be cheaper than if you buy it at the bins where it's like $2 something per pound and the thing weighs 3 pounds. It's not always guaranteed to be the best deal, but it's consistently a really good deal, and that opens up a lot of possibilities for you. One of the nice things about the bins is that a lot of the vintage t-shirts wind up there because they are not in good enough condition to make it to the retail floors, because the screeners don't know that vintage t-shirts are oftentimes worth a lot of money. And even stuff that's totally gunked up, beat up, covered in weirdness will still sell. Like I sold a like a Coors Light t-shirt from the 80s that was covered in rips and stains and coffee spills, other kinds of spills. Looked awful. Looked like someone fished it out of an outhouse, and it still sold for $30. Got that at the bins. The thing with that, though, is that every teenager in the universe also knows that this is the case, and they will be there looking low-key for the fire, for the flame, for the heat. And there is a ton of competition on that end. There's a shadow benefit there, which is you may not have all that much competition comparatively for the more contemporary stuff, because so many of the people that go to the bins who are resellers are looking for vintage. So if you know contemporary brands, you put yourself at an advantage. And also if you have a little bit of a competitive streak, that covers a lot of bases. And I encourage you to cultivate the power within yourself to be a dick when it is necessary and appropriate. One of the biggest advantages of the bins is that you can get a ton of sourcing done in one place at one time. I think there is something to be said on behalf of camping out at the bins for a long shift and stockpiling a treasure trove of a death pile all in one go, over driving around to multiple thrift stores and sorting and hunting and pecking and screening and doing all that at a higher monetary outlay for less stuff. I think it's easier on the body, even though it can be exhausting. And, you know, I see people do these marathon sessions where they set up a shopping cart against the wall and they bring their whole family and they bring whole meals. Like, I've seen this. I saw this in LA. Probably every time I went there is people with coolers, like eating full, you know, 5-course meals for lunch. I think it's smart. I think that's one of the better ways to source. You do find really good stuff every once in a while, not just vintage stuff. Sometimes stuff will just slip through the cracks. Maybe they overpriced it at a Goodwill. It was sitting there for 60 bucks. Nobody bought it. What a shocker. And it wound up at the bins with a price tag still on it, which is a good trick. If you find a lot of stuff that still has like the Goodwill tags on it at the bins, that's a good indicator that that's going to be a good point source of inventory for you. More often, you just find bread and butter pieces that you can take a big cut from in terms of net. It allows you to price stuff lower than if you were sourcing it for $5, $7, $8 at a Goodwill. It opens up a lot of doors that would remain closed to you, or certainly are not as easily opened if you were just sourcing at retail thrift stores. And that can definitely compensate for the lower quality of goods. For example, if I find 3 pairs of Lucky Brand jeans, even if they're not that nice, if I can flip those and make 15 bucks profit each from the bins, that's equivalent to finding an Arc'teryx shirt, a short sleeve button-up Arc'teryx shirt for $7 and flipping it for however much, you know. Should you source only at the bins? I mean, maybe. There's never an answer for that. I think it's good to mix it up a little bit. I have my preferences. I source all over the place these days. I have multiple different places that I thrift and source, not just at the bin, certainly, but it's a pretty consistent part of my diet, my intake of death pile material. And I think if you have access to it, you should take advantage of it. If you're a shoe seller, I don't think that there's really a better source than the bins. There's not that much of that happening here in San Diego, but up in LA, they would have these big shoe bins. I found all kinds of great stuff in there. If I had that resource available, there's like a little half of a bin that they fill with shoes here. If that weren't the case, if there were full-blown shoe bins, that would be a bigger part of my output. But there may be other stuff like books or hard goods that you can find at the bins that are affordable enough now to you that you can make them a part of your reselling business. You can just tack them on because you're there anyway. Hope this helps. If you've never tried the bins, definitely at least try it, and try it a handful of times. Don't just go once and get intimidated and then bounce, or grossed out and bounce. Thanks for watching. Hope it helps. See you next time.